All right, welcome everyone to today's Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangouts. Unfortunately, the last Hangout didn't quite make it, so I set up a new one. Um, this also means I don't have the questions all the way they were submitted, but I copied them onto the side so we can still go through pretty much most of those. As always, if there's anyone here new or relatively new to the Hangouts, and if you have a question, feel free to jump on in and ask away.
I have a question.
I've seen your face before.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't paying attention. When you want me, I'm here.
Jason or
Yeah.
Andrew?
Yep. Sure.
Anything on your mind?
Yeah, thank you. So I've been following, a couple of things that the Webmaster guidelines that you yourself have talked about as far as A/B testing, use of canonical versus the no meta, no index, and how long you leave tests up for. So I have a scenario that I haven't seen that's been talked about in the guidelines specifically, which is for our testing program, we do a holdout group from the beginning of the year. So say we will always have 10% of traffic going to a version of the page throughout the entire year that's excluded from testing, so we can make sure we're looking at measured lift. So say that's example.com/holdout, and that is for our server system will say 10% of the traffic go here. So for that audience, it's essentially the homepage. 90% of the traffic will go to just example.com and be available for A/B testing and whatever else. So my question is, from a markup standpoint, how do you handle that example.com/holdout, knowing that it's technically a test, but it's going to be 10% of the traffic for the full year, and it is a duplicate version of the homepage in essence?
If that's essentially equivalent to the normal homepage, I just put a rel canonical on there. And
Okay.
even if that's for a longer period of time, if this is really like a smaller set of the traffic for your site and it's equivalent to the homepage, then I just put a rel canonical on there so that if we run across that URL, we can at least forward everything to your main URL.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, Barry, I'll let you jump in with your first questions. As long
Thank
as we
you
can
so
get through
much.
some of the other ones too.
Seems like there's a firestorm online right now, specifically around a few things. I'll start with it's really related. So there was a core ranking update this weekend, right? That's confirmation. Okay, good. And also, you guys confirmed at some point, I don't know when, that there was that Panda algorithm, or parts of the Panda algorithm, or however you want to classify it, is now part of that core ranking algorithm. Confirmed?
I think so.
Could you tell me, one, approximately when that happened? Like 2 months ago, December? Just approximately. It doesn't have to be exact date.
I don't know what we specified there. I know we talked about it a while back. I asked Gary and Zeneb. They weren't aware of the date exactly either, so I have to double check on that. I saw your tweet about that too.
Will you get me a response? Because Gary's busy, so he can't get me a response.
Yeah, if I hear something back, I'll let you know.
Okay, and there's a lot of confusion on Twitter for some reason right now about somebody thinking it's real time. The core ranking algorithm is somewhat pushed manually. It's not really running constantly real time, or maybe pieces of it are, but it seems like people are saying it's real time. It's real time. It's probably a hard question to answer because obviously there's certain things that are real time, there's certain things that are not.
Exactly.
But obviously what happened this weekend was not real time. Something changed. So what can you say about that to clarify?
I'd say that's just a normal part of our updates. So sometimes it's something that, so when we talked with the team about this, they said, well, it's nothing big. It's just like a normal part of the updates we always do. And I suspect maybe the SEO weather type tools out there are tracking things in a different way than we would look at it. So that's something where maybe something that overall doesn't really have a big effect is still picked up by them.
Okay. All right. I'll maybe come back with more questions later, but I'll let other people chime in. Thank you.
All right. Let me run through some of the questions that were submitted already. I suspect the Q&A stuff is still, the current one is kind of empty. Yeah. So some of these that we got for the Hangout before we started. We received a high number of URLs warning from Google on our census content. It contains 134 million people. The site indexed collections of people, about 6 million, which link to no indexed person pages. We'd like to know if Google is having trouble crawling and indexing our site. So probably, if you're getting this message, that's a sign. So essentially, this message comes when we discover a bunch of new URLs for your website that we haven't known about first. And it usually comes before we actually go out and crawl those pages. So if these are all pages that have a no index, then of course they won't be indexed, but we'll still have to crawl those pages first to actually see that they're no indexed. So that's something where if you add a bunch of different links to pages that are actually no index, you might trigger this message. What also happens in a lot of cases that I looked at, it's not so much that the site itself has a lot of pages by design, but also that they have a lot of maybe separate URL parameters in addition. So if you have 130 million pages and you have 10 different URL parameters with different variations, then that's kind of like all multiplied by each other. So then suddenly you have, I don't know, 1 billion variations of different pages, which actually map to 100 million different individual pages, which means that's a lot of pages that we have to crawl for us to even recognize that these are duplicates or to recognize that they have a no index on them. So that's something, I take those example URLs that are given there and really double check to make sure that the URL parameters that are in there, if you have any of those URLs, are something that you'd want to actually have crawled and indexed. Next question here. At the end of our blog posts, we have a plugin that shows 4 related posts. We made them all no-follow, as Google doesn't like automatically generated content. But since we're linking to our own blog posts, should we make them do follow? Sure, you can make them do follow. That's absolutely no problem. This is essentially helping us to crawl your website by understanding which parts of the site belong together. So that's certainly a good use of normal do follow links. I'd kind of be cautious about this if you're linking to external blog posts, and especially if that plugin is a part of some bigger scheme where maybe you're in an ad network where you link to related blog posts on other people's sites and they link back to you, and it's kind of almost this advertising relationship there. Then in those cases, I'd certainly use a no-follow. But if you're linking to your own blog posts on your own site, normal followed links are perfectly fine. Can I duplicate a subdomain of my site A to site B and then add the rel canonical to pass the link juice from site B back to site A? Some competitors of ours are doing that and rank really well. Is that a violation of Google's policies? So with the rel canonical, you're essentially saying these pages should be folded together, which means we try to treat them as one page. It's not that you'd have any additional value of splitting that up and then folding it back together again. After change of our site structure, the front page content was moved to a subpage, and that subpage should rank now. We link there internally with relevant terms, but there's still a lot of external links to the homepage. Should we try to get those links changed? Maybe. It's hard to say. So in general, if you move your content from your homepage to some lower level page, it's going to take us a while to actually figure out what kind of change you're doing there and what you're trying to achieve with that change. So that's something where I wouldn't expect any immediate change, especially since you can't redirect from the homepage to that lower level page. So it's not like a normal change on your site where you move from URL 1 to URL 2. You're essentially taking the content, moving it somewhere else, and then hoping that we treat that new page the same as the existing page. when actually the existing page continues to exist as well. So it's a bit of a different situation than a normal move within your content. Is there any tool to test your AMP pages? We've developed AMP pages for a site and want to test them. How do we diagnose that things are good to go? So on the one hand, we're running a beta test for AMP sites. You can sign up at g.co/search console tester, all one word. And that'll probably help you to kind of figure out some of these problems. On the other hand, there are two main tools you can use on a per-page basis. On the one hand, you can add hash development equals 1 to the AMP page, and then look into the browser's JavaScript console. That'll run the validator within the AMP pages and give you information if this AMP page is theoretically valid. In addition, you can use a structured data testing tool to double check the page to see if it has all of the right markup, in particular the news article markup. Let's see, does Googlebot care about the browser cache? I mean, if a website uses the browser cache, does Googlebot also see the current version, or is there sometimes trouble, like when you change a CSS file and you need to refresh everything to kind of see that? We do cache the CSS and JavaScript files normally, and theoretically it's possible that there's this time frame between making changes in one kind of before we actually see it on the other pages. But in general, we're pretty good at following your cache guidelines that you specify on your site so that we try to pick up the new versions whenever we can. I have a multilingual site. Every customer can switch the language through a drop-down menu that contains links to an alternate URL. I saw many requests from Googlebot to these links. This can be dangerous. We have an alternate tag in the head, and that works well. So in general, that wouldn't be something that I'd really worry about. Especially if those separate multilingual URLs essentially result in that page loading in that language, and that's something you kind of want to have happen. On the other hand, if you use those multilingual URLs to set a cookie and then change the language on the existing URL, then that would be something where we might not even notice that language change. But if you're saying that everything is working well with the rel alternate hreflang tag, then I wouldn't worry about it. Then it sounds like you're already doing the right thing. Let's see. When updating an article, what's the proper way to do it in WordPress so that Google can show the last update date in search? I usually just write update and then the date in the post above the paragraph, but obviously that doesn't work well for Google. So that should actually work fairly well for us. We should be able to recognize that date on those pages and actually pick that up. I guess the tricky part is sometimes we'll show the initial article date, sometimes we'll show the update date in the search results. So it's not something where you'd always explicitly see that date in the search results in the snippet. I'm not completely sure, but I think you can also specify the date using structured data markup, which gives us a little bit more information too. Let's see. A part of the website is accessible only depending on your referrer and by entering the URL directly in the browser. How does Google handle those pages for SEO? Is there any penalty for the main part of the site? Should we be using no index? Let's see. Tricky question. So on the one hand, Googlebot crawls without a referrer. So if those pages are accessible without a referrer, then we should be able to crawl and index them. On the other hand, when a user clicks through a search result, they'll have a referrer, so that'll be passed along. And if you're blocking users depending on the referrer, then I would almost go ahead and put a no index on those pages to make it a little bit clearer that those are really pages that you don't want to have indexed, that you don't want to have people going to. If you want to take it a step further, if this is really confidential content that you have on those pages that you're trying to kind of keep out of search and keep inaccessible, then I would really go with server-side authentication for those kind of pages so that it's really locked down and nobody can just link to those pages and kind of make them available or kind of access them directly or indirectly. So that's something where if it's really something confidential, then I would lock it down properly. Do interstitial commercial ads, not advertising the app of the website shown for mobile users. Are they okay with Google's quality guidelines? I think at the moment they're pretty okay in the sense that we wouldn't explicitly go against that. From a personal point of view, I find them extremely obnoxious, especially on mobile, because it's sometimes really hard to kind of get past them. And if your website loads slow already because it's on mobile, and then you essentially block the user from seeing the content unless they find the right millimeter to click on to kind of remove the interstitial, then that's kind of obnoxious. And I don't know if a lot of people would actually go through that and say, well, this website is really worth the trouble to actually look at. So from my point of view, I kind of discourage from that. But from the Webmaster guidelines point of view, I think that at the moment that's not something that we would say would be explicitly forbidden. I manage some movie websites, and a common practice is to force a YouTube pop-up when the user first lands on the site. I don't know, that would kind of be obnoxious to me too. And then to get the main content, they have to close the YouTube pop-up. What are your thoughts on doing this from Google's content rendering point of view? It's possible that we would actually see that pop up and try to index that as a part of your content, which probably isn't what you're trying to achieve there. And in general, this seems like something where you're kind of being obnoxious to the user and probably isn't really going to help your site in the long run. So again, from a search Webmaster Guidelines point of view, this is probably not something that would be problematic there, but for your users, from a user experience point of view, probably not something I'd recommend doing. The guidelines say to use rel canonical for duplicate pages. I think we talked about this just before. Fetches Google renders a website only to 1,024 pixels wide. Does Google calculate rankings for a website from this view? We have normal website that looks good on 1,200 pixels and separate mobile version that looks bad on 1,024. Can this be a problem? So as far as I know, the width that we use for rendering for indexing is also the same 1,024 pixels that we show in Fetches Google. So if your website really looks bad there and the content isn't actually visible there, then that might be something to kind of look at and maybe improve. In general, even if it doesn't look perfect, but the content is still there, and we can actually pick up the content there, then that's not something I'd really worry about too much. To what extent does a user's search history and or browser history affect their search results in Google? And does that vary depending on the device that they use to perform their searches, if at all? So we do have some amount of personalization. It's really not something that I'd be able to quantify and say to what extent, like some number that we do use personalization. You probably see this yourself when you search for something and you see your own site in search results where maybe you wouldn't expect to see it, and you check in an incognito window and you see that it's not actually shown in that position for a not logged in user. So to some extent, we do use kind of personalization based on the user's search history. With regards to the device, I believe you basically just have the different mobile factors as well. So On mobile, we do take into account, for example, the mobile friendliness of a site with regards to its ranking. So that might be something where you'd see slightly different results when searching with your account on a mobile device.
Hey, John,
Yes.
quick follow-up question there. So does browse history, so does my browse history on desktop, if I've logged into my account, impact search rankings on my mobile device if I'm logged into the same username?
If you have your web histories enabled, then I think that would. So
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure, but I know my previous searches are always on my phone when I search.
Yeah.
So I would assume that that connection would be there.
Great, thanks.
I was wondering if the algorithm is different between Taiwan and .com, for example, for Panda and Penguin. And for most part of our search ranking algorithms, they're essentially the same for all countries and languages. There are very few parts of our algorithms that are different or that are specific to individual languages usually, or countries. Sometimes the countries aspect plays more a role with regards to which search feature is actually shown. So whether or not we'd have like this featured snippet shown or not, that might depend on your country. How we understand your content might vary from language to language, in that sometimes it's easier to understand synonyms, sometimes it's easier to split words, especially when you're looking at maybe languages that we're not that good at traditionally. So those aspects can play a role there. With regards to most of our algorithms, though, we do try to make them as generic as possible, because if we have one algorithm that works really well across the board, then we don't have to worry about fine-tuning it and testing it in all these different languages or countries. We can kind of assume that it'll continue working across the board. We can update one version and make sure that those improvements are available to everyone worldwide. Let's see, hosting bad neighbors. Should we worry about it? What should we look for? So in general, we're pretty good at understanding that sites host things together. And if you go to an internet hoster, then chances are, especially with the lower end packages that you get for hosting, you'll be on a shared server with maybe thousands or even hundreds of thousands of other websites. And some of those might be kind of questionable websites or even crazy websites. And that's not something that you can really control. Right? It's something that essentially happens on the hoster side, and if we can tell that this is like a normal website hosting situation, then that's not something that we'd really worry about. The more problematic situation might be if you're hosting hundreds of thousands of spammy websites and you include one kind of good website on the same server, then of course what might happen is our algorithm think, well, everything on this server is really spammy, therefore it's not worthwhile kind of watching out for that one individual site that's actually kind of good. So if you're hosting your website and you're going to a normal web hosting provider, one that you kind of trust to uphold their terms of service, that kind of is reactive to when people do really crazy stuff, then I wouldn't really worry about that. I wouldn't try to like do a reverse IP lookup and look up at all the websites that are hosted on the same IP. Chances are you'll find something crazy and a lot of reasonable stuff there. So that's generally not something worth looking for. Creating instances of a CMS for our partners. They would sell the same sort of sites. What would be the impact on the site's SEO? Would the content be considered as duplicate? If you're copying the content to other sites, then yes, that content would be considered a duplicate version of the same content. But like I've mentioned before, we don't have a duplicate content penalty. It's not that there would be a manual action taken for sites that are kind of sharing the same content like this. So we'll try to figure out which of these are the right ones to show in the search results for specific queries and show the right version. So in particular, if you're taking the same content and you have it on maybe one website that's hosted in, I don't know, or in German, and the other website is in English, or one in the UK and one in Australia, and you have the same English language content, then maybe depending on the user's location, we would guide them to one or the other. We'd know that there are duplicates or that part of the content is duplicate, but that doesn't mean that we would like never show that website. We try to pick the version that's more relevant to the user and show that one in the search results there. Does the search appearance, HTML improvements, duplicate titles and descriptions in Search Console take into account the link rel canonical? We're seeing it complaining on pages that have this added. So what's probably happening there is that we're indexing the pages with a rel canonical first as the version that we find it, because we have to kind of index that version in order to process the rel canonical. And then in the second step, we're actually following the rel canonical and using that to index the canonical version. So what might happen, depending on the timing, is we have one version indexed like this and one version indexed like that. And that might show up as a duplicate in search appearance there. In general, though, that settles down fairly quickly in that we follow the rel canonical, we focus on the canonical version, and over time you would see primarily the canonical version in these search features. Let's see. Maybe we can take a few from the chat, and I'll try to scroll through the questions that we have so far. What's on your mind?
I should talk more? Okay, great. I still want more clarification about what it means that Panda is part of the core ranking algorithm. I know there was lots of complications in terms of getting that to be in the core algorithm last time, and it's like, yeah, we put it in the core algorithm. It's like kind of a matter of fact. Hey, yeah, we did this. We put it in part of the core ranking factors. Who knows when? Probably a few months ago. And I'm kind of like stunned by that because I kind of thought there will never be another Panda update. But I guess now there's going to be always going to be these Panda updates within the core ranking algorithm. The question is, what is that? What does this all mean? What? It's hard to explain, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's just, why didn't you let us know initially when it happened? Did you know? And why didn't you let us know? And two is, obviously you don't want us to worry about it, but for us, it's like, all right, people are scratching their head. They're hit by this Panda 4.2 algorithm, and they never got out. And now you can say, hey, well, now it's part of our core ranking algorithm. It'll probably run more frequently. And people are like, what do you mean by frequently? Is it real time? So these are the questions that are going on all over the place right now. So I'm trying to like give some clarification to people. So I'll let you talk, and then I'll ask you about Penguin for a second.
Oh my God. I don't know what we want to say about this specifically. As far as I know, it's more of a rolling update, so that some changes from Panda take a while to kind of roll out, and over time we kind of recalculate things and we kind of start the next cycle. So it's not so much a real time as something that's just periodically rolling out slowly.
So could I rephrase that for you?
Sorry?
Can I try to rephrase that?
Sure.
So with the last one, 4.2, we knew it was a rolling update, and I believe the assumption was that all the Panda scores were figured out on a specific day for the site. Let's say it was on, I don't know, July 4th, 2014, whatever it might be. That's when the scores were calculated for the site, and then it was rolled out slowly from there. Are you saying now in the core ranking algorithm, there's still going to be those times where you recalculate the scores every so often? Not real time, but it's going to be, the scores are not real time. It's like not like tomorrow, every single day I'll have a new Panda score, which is baked into this algorithm.
As far as I know, that's the case, yes.
So it's, as far as you know, it's not real time in terms of that scoring.
Exactly.
But the rollout could still be gradual and slow. Okay, I got it, I think. And keep going.
Yeah, I don't really have that much more to add to this.
Okay.
So I mean, it's something where um, it's possible over time that we'll have more information about how that specifically happens. But I think at the moment that's kind of the level that we think is relevant.
Would you say that people really shouldn't have to worry that much these days about this Panda algorithm now that it's baked in? Like it's gonna be less apparent to people.
I mean, worry about if you know your website is lower quality, then of course you should worry
I didn't know my website was lower quality, and I got hit.
Yeah, but I mean, it's something where we try to look at the quality of the website and understand which ones are higher quality, which ones are generally lower quality, and take that into account in the ranking side. And this is essentially just a way of kind of making those updates a little bit faster or a little bit more regular.
So you think it's going to be more regular and more faster? Okay.
I suspect, yeah. I don't want to make any promises.
Okay, and just around that, the core ranking algorithm, whenever you run this core ranking algorithm, it doesn't mean that there's going to be, let's say you have like 100 signals in this core ranking algorithm, right? It could be 102, it could be 300, it could be 3,000, but every single time you run this core ranking algorithm, which I think is always, but again, that's the confusing part, does it run every signal in that algorithm? In the core ranking algorithm, or it can run, let's say, 15 signals this time and 20 signals that time? Is it always running the same signals when you run these things? I'm making this more complicated than it has to be, right?
I guess that Barry wants to ask, what's the main difference between having a separate algorithm versus having it integrated into the core algorithm? What's the difference? What does that mean exactly?
I don't know.
John, let me ask a different question that's related. Would you ever foresee a time where you let people know within Webmaster Tools what our part of the algorithm or separate algorithm is affecting their site? Because if not, then I'm not sure what the point is of know or guessing anyway.
Yeah, I can't promise anything with regards to like, would you ever do this? That's kind of a very vague situation, but we do regularly push with the teams to make sure that, or to try to get kind of more information about the algorithmic changes into Search Console, so that especially if there's something very actionable that the webmaster can do, that information is given there. So if we, I don't know, had an algorithm that looked at, I don't know, duplicate content on your website, and we thought it would be useful for you to kind of know about this duplicate content so that you can fix it on your website, then that might be something that we'd show in Search Console. It's really kind of tricky because a lot of the ranking algorithms that we have aren't really made for actionability on the webmaster side. So if we think that your site isn't relevant for this query, it's not that we can tell you, well, you should make your site more relevant. You kind of already see that based on its ranking for those queries. So those are kind of the tricky ones, and that's essentially most of our ranking algorithms are that way. They're made for us to figure out which ones are the most relevant sites in the search for the search results, and not primarily made as a way of giving more information to webmasters. So
would it even help people then, even if I'm trying to play devil's advocate here, if you said you're affected by Panda or you're affected by Penguin, because most people would just assume that Penguin's mainly links, Panda's mainly content or quality. I'm not sure what their next step would be anyway, even if you told them.
I can see some situations where it might make sense if you knew a little bit more about what specifically the problem was. I imagine for most webmasters, it's either in the gray area that it's kind of the way that we see your site anyway. It's not something special that we'd look at. And a lot of them are probably in the area that, well, I know I did all of this sneaky stuff in the past.
Well, that's the, I mean, if you take our site out of the equation altogether, I'm not sure how many people get that news and then are genuinely shocked.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they might not be shocked, but they might go ahead and say, all right, now it's time I clean up my act, and you get arrested one time, you get arrested a second time for whatever it might be, small things. You might be, all right, it's a wake-up call, and maybe it's time I stop buying links or whatever, or trading links or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But back to the question is, I like the way Mihai phrased it. Is what's the difference of it? Is it just going to be more regular? What's the difference that we could expect now that Panda is part of the core ranking algorithm?
I don't really have a good answer for you there.
Okay.
Barry, what? Assuming you've got an answer, what behaviour do you think would change dependent on it? If John said, okay, we treat them differently because X, would you or your clients then change their behaviour?
When I was hit by Panda 4.1, I just played around with the Discus comments to kind of make sure I wasn't publishing the spam stuff better. I was just I did take some action on the spam in my comments. That's the one little thing I did. I didn't think my content itself was bad, although some people in the community do think it's bad. But that's the one thing I did. And I know people when they get penguin penalties, they do link audits, they hire people for that. I know people do things, so it's not, it's the same reason why Google will notify you if you have a link notification penalty or something like that, a manual link action. So I think it's useful, but at the same time, I see why Google doesn't want to provide that at this point, or why it might be hard. So
Google also has a benefit. Maybe this is paranoia as well. Google also has a benefit by notifying you of link stuff because they collect a lot of information on links. If millions of webmasters start cleaning up the same links, just general quality guidelines. Google doesn't get anything in return, really, does it?
Well, if we have good websites to show in search, then that's something of value too, right? But I think the tricky part is in general that most of our algorithms are really made for search, and the output that we get from them is really like how we should show this site in search results, and not so much this is something specific that the webmaster should change. But maybe at some point we'll have more information on, I think especially the quality side, that might be something where we could give some information potentially, where maybe you'd have something like a quality score like you have for AdWords, where you could see, well, we think your site is kind of low quality, and maybe you want to kind of rethink what you're actually doing online. But
wouldn't you still have to break down, because quality is still very subjective, wouldn't you need to break that down into various different parts?
I don't know. I mean, it's all very theoretical. So at the moment we don't have plans for that.
I think when we're asking these questions regarding whether there's going to be information in Search Console about these things, the ranking algorithm, we're mainly worried about the web spam related ranking parts of the algorithm, rather than whether a page is relevant for a query or not. Because we can kind of figure that on our own, and of course that's, as you said, not much the webmaster can change. If you're not relevant for a query, then you're not relevant. But when it's a web spam algorithm, that can be useful information. You can figure out if your SEO team is doing something they shouldn't be doing. That might actually be something that the webmaster can use to change, to actually do a change, and especially when he's not in control or he doesn't know whether SEO related activities are being done or not. Penguin would be something.
So one thing where we do something similar is with some of the hacked site stuff, where we do have algorithms that try to recognize when a site gets hacked, and we'll show that in the manual action section. And if you go through the reconsideration flow, then that gets cleaned up a little bit faster than if we kind of have to algorithmically wait for everything to be recrawled and recognized as kind of clean. So that's a kind of almost like a mixed section there. But it's good feedback to have, and it's good to hear it from time to time again, because that kind of reinforces that asking for more information like this in Search Console is the right thing to do.
By the way, regarding what Barry asked, so is when we're going to launch the next version of Penguin, which is going to be real time, is that going to be directly integrated with the core ranking algorithm, or is it going to be separate like it was until now, I assume?
I don't know what the specific plans are there.
Okay. So there's no news regarding Penguin.
Nothing to share.
Is your gut still this month?
I don't know. What can I say? It's I obviously am happy when it launches as fast as possible, so that we can kind of move on from there. But I also want the team to kind of make sure that they're happy with the results. I don't want to kind of push something artificially, but just by like us going in and saying, oh, we said it would be there by the 1st of February, therefore you have to push it, even if it's not quite ready. We prefer to kind of make sure everything is ready and actually working as it should be before we make it live.
John, is this practice usual where you kind of create a new algorithm that detects a certain ranking signal, you create it separately and it feeds data to the core ranking algorithm, then later on when it's further developed, you integrate it with a core ranking algorithm? Is that the usual process? Maybe rank brain, for example, was initially separate and now it's part of the core ranking algorithm. Is that the case, for example?
It kind of depends. So sometimes we do it like this, sometimes we do it differently. It really depends on the situation, on the data that's available, and how we can kind of process that.
I assume that the bigger the data or the more complex data you needed to create something separate, maybe. Okay.
You'd almost have to join us to find out more.
Got it.
All right, let me double check to see that we're not missing any important webmaster type questions.
Oh, I have one more. I actually tweeted you on this. This was a question on the search forums. If a user verifies his or her website in Search Console, then let's say it's verified via a meta tag, and they remove the meta tag. How often does Search Console verifies it to check if the tag is there?
I think it's once a month, approximately.
And that's so it's meta tag, HTML file, any verification method is once a month, or it depends.
I think we aim for like a once a month cycle, and it's not necessarily like on the first of that month, but kind of flowing.
Okay.
But you can also force that if you're in the account. You can say, what is it? There's a way of kind of refreshing that directly if you're the owner of that site. So if you remove someone else's meta tag and you want their access removed immediately, then you can kind of force that to happen through Search Console.
Okay.
I forgot what the name was of that link. Let's see. Here's one. I'm doing SEO for a used car dealer. If I get a backlink from a website having more traffic, does that mean it'll improve my SEO rankings? So in general, just because you have a link that gives traffic to your website doesn't necessarily mean that your website is more relevant or higher quality and that we should show it higher in the search results. So in particular, if you buy advertising from a different website, and that advertising has a no-follow on there, that might result in a lot of traffic to your website, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we would see that as a sign that your website is actually high quality and that it should be ranking higher. So generally what I recommend doing is really making sure that your website is such that all of this traffic that you're getting to your website is actually people who are also coming back again, who are saying, well, this is a fantastic website that I found through this advertisement or this promotion or somewhere else, someone mentioned it, and it's something that I go back to that I recommend to other people as well. So kind of turning that one-time visit from someone who's coming through an ad into something that's more regular, and then that's something that we might pick up for the search results for the ranking as well, especially if we see people recommending this website and saying, hey, this is a really fantastic website. Maybe I found it here, or I found it here, or someone else recommended it to me, but this is something that I want to recommend. Then that's something that we might pick up as a link and take that into account for ranking. I think that's pretty much it from the questions here. There's a Penguin question that I think I answered. A question about the Google Plus business pages changing. That's something you probably have to take up with the Google Plus Google My Business team directly, not something that I'd be able to help out with. Yeah, so any last questions from you all?
John, regarding AMP pages, if, for example, you use the hashtag developer equals one and you get some errors regarding one of the images, let's say, you use certain attributes that aren't supported. Does that mean that Google will completely ignore the AMP page, or it doesn't matter? Oh, okay.
So if the AMP page doesn't validate, which could be something as simple as specifying the image wrong or not having an image, then we won't take that connection into account for the AMP pages. So they really have to be valid AMP pages. They have to pass the validator. They have to pass the structured data testing tool so that we find the right markup on these pages, and then we can take them into account.
So it has to be 100% error-free before it's taken into account.
Yeah, and we do that on a per-page basis. So if a part of your site validates and a part doesn't validate at all, then we'll take that part into account. And it's not that we'd say, well, half of the site is bad AMP pages, we don't want to trust it. We'll essentially take those into account that we can pick up and ignore the ones that we can't validate yet.
Any idea when the AMP page test will begin? Or?
It should already be running, the beta. So if you signed up for the general Search Console testing, then you should have a link to the AMP testing there as well.
Okay, I'll check it out.
All right. So with that, let's take a break here. I'll try to make sure the next Hangout works a little bit more smoothly so that we can start on time. But thank you all for bearing with me, and hopefully we'll see some of you again in one of the future Hangouts.
Thank you, John.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, John.
Thanks.
Thank you, John.